You're listening to the Heart of Giving podcast with Art Taylor, powered by bbbgive.org. Here we explore the motivations that form the basis of giving and service. We inspire generosity and celebrate the transformative effects that giving and service have on the human spirit and on community. The conversations featured on the podcast also uncover giving strategies that educate and provide tools to help listeners make impactful gifts of both their time and money. We hope you enjoy this episode.
Well, hello, everyone. Good afternoon if you're on the East Coast. We are really thrilled to have this opportunity to present to you today our session on planning your philanthropic legacy. I am Art Taylor. I am the president and CEO of the BBB Wise Giving Alliance, also known as give.org, where you can find all of our work. Give.org is established to help donors make informed giving decisions. We publish reports on charities based on the rigorous 20 standards for charity accountability that we developed some years ago. And these reports will help anyone interested in knowing the trustworthiness of charities get that information. Today, we decided that we would organize an event that we call Planning Your Philanthropic Legacy. We wanted to do this because many people give to organizations throughout their lifetime. And given that we all have an expiration date, we want to show our organizations, I believe, that our commitment to them can continue beyond our lifetime. But there's certain things you would want to know when you're making, quote, that final gift to the philanthropies that matter to you. And we're going to talk about them. We're also going to talk about how you can execute that gift in a way that makes it secure and meaningful. And with me today, we have three amazing guests who are going to respond to a battery of questions that we've put together to try to give you as much insight into how this all works and what you should be thinking about. And at the end, we'll have some time also for your questions and answers. So let me introduce our panelists and get the show on the road. First, we have Barbara O'Reilly, who is a CFRE, Certified Fundraising Executive, which means she's passed a rigorous test. I happen to be on the board of CFRE, and I can tell you that is a very important designation. She is also the principal at Windmill Hill Consulting, LLC. Barbara has 30 years of annual fund, major gift, and campaign fundraising experience at major nonprofit organizations, including Harvard University, the National Trust for Historic Preservation, Oxford University in England, and the American Red Cross. Her consulting firm, Windmill Hill, helps nonprofit organizations peel back the layers and develop a profitable fundraising strategy to build more effective donor relationships and catapult their revenue. Also today, we have Lori Kranzer. Lori is a seasoned philanthropic advisor, and Lori comes to us from an organization that we call Link Elevating Philanthropy. Link Elevating Philanthropy. Everyday planned giving is what they do, and she supports organizations' connections with donors and their legacies and builds sustainable legacy programs, including planned giving, endowments, as well as non-cash assets to support mission and transformational impact. And we have Jessica Birken, who is NMN Esquire. She is the owner of Birken Law Office, PLLC. Jess is the owner. She helps nonprofits solve problems so they can quit worrying about and get back to what matters, which is obviously their mission. In her spare time, she makes videos, courses, and other materials that empower nonprofits to do things right. And using the right tools makes the right connections and helps nonprofits get what they need to grow stronger. So let's get right into it. My first question goes to you, Lori. What are the ways to create a legacy gift without an attorney?
I get this question all the time. So there's lots of ways. And it comes down to first speaking with the individual to figure out what it is that they're looking to accomplish. There are legacy gifts that can be done currently, and then there are gifts that can be done in someone's estate planning. So there's different ways to do a legacy gift. Some of the and when I say legacy gift, it's also planned gifts. We used to call them planned gifts, deferred givings, lots of different ways that we refer to them. And it's a very personal gift to the donor. Some of the ways that they can do it without an attorney, people usually think about bequests in the will, which you really need an attorney for. You could do gifts through endowment that don't necessarily need an attorney, or a gift annuity that doesn't necessarily need an attorney. So there are gifts out there, gift vehicles, if they're suitable for the donor, after they work with their advisor to figure out which gift planning vehicle they should use, that they don't require an attorney to actually draft.
Fantastic. I'm going to come back to a question about gift vehicles later on. But Barbara, let me ask you, what are we seeing in terms of giving trends from bequests?
Yeah, so the Giving USA report, which comes out every June, it's produced by the Giving USA Foundation, which is a part of the Giving Institute, has released. So for 2020, though it always looks at the year prior. So for 2020, we saw an estimated contributions in the US at about $485 billion. Of that, bequests were about 46 billion, which was about 9% of that total, more than what we saw coming from corporations, which was at about 21 billion. So we often, as fundraisers and nonprofit leaders, think we've got to go after corporations because it's either quicker, easier, faster, all of the above. But the reality is that bequests are coming from individuals, and it's a trend that we cannot overlook. And we know that we're in the great, what are they calling it? The great wealth transfer. I've been hearing this talked about since, I started consulting, and it's been going on since 1999, I think, 1998 or 1999, and it's expected to go until about 2052. They estimate that it's something like $68 trillion of assets are going to be transferred from one generation to the next. And again, an estimated 6 trillion of that will be going to charities. Now, again, these are all estimate numbers, predicted, some predictions. However, the reality is that there are assets that have the potential to be going and are hopefully planned to go to the charitable sector. And so nonprofits who aren't thinking about how to incorporate this into their estate plans now may potentially be slow on the receiving end in the future.
So, Jess, how do nonprofits view these planned gifts?
Well, I think, in large part, it depends on the nonprofit. For larger organizations, they're really looking at this strategically and with an eye on future development. And for small nonprofits, it may not even be a twinkle in their eye. They may be completely unaware that a donor is even considering leaving them a gift. So I think it really depends on the organization and where they're at. I think, of course, every nonprofit would love to continue on a donor's legacy through a bequest. It just depends on whether they're cognizant that it's coming. May be another issue.
Yeah. Let me just ask a quick follow-up on that. For people who are planning to make a deferred gift, it's always helpful, I assume, to somehow let the nonprofit know, although that's not a requirement, right?
Yeah, I don't know of any requirement for that. Certainly you could leave a gift in your will. And when I was in-house at a larger national nonprofit, I was on the we have to deal with it side of getting some unexpected bequests. So I mean, in my experience, I would say it's definitely preferable to continue to lean into that relationship with the nonprofit, let them know that it's coming, work with their development team to know, like, how it should be structured or whether it should be restricted. If you're trying to fund a particular program, those sorts of things are good to sort of flesh out with the nonprofit as you do your planning.
Let me just throw this in too. Fundraising is hard. It's rewarding because we give people an opportunity to support important missions and objectives through those gifts that they bring in, that they come in. But on the other hand, it's difficult work. And I just want to tell donors out there how much you elevate the motivation and how inspiring you can be just by letting people know that you've thought about them in your estate plan. You will be surprised just how uplifting that is for an organization that's really working hard to raise the funds they need to accomplish a goal. So Barbara, what does a nonprofit, or how does a nonprofit balance deferred giving conversations with their donors? So, we need money right now, but we also need money in the future. How do we have a conversation with our donors about the timing of gifts?
So it certainly depends on the level of gift that's going to be committed, but I would say it could start as simply as making sure that in an email signature you've got some reminder to consider leaving that organization in their estate plans, and that's something that's just a constant little reminder. It could be on your website in some messaging, it could be in a newsletter, some profile of a donor whom has been has left the organization in their estate plans and so forth. So keeping those sort of softer touch points front and center as gentle reminders that this is an option for giving is important. But I think there's also, as you start to identify more sort of larger gift conversations, thinking about what is it that the donor wants to achieve? What is the ultimate legacy, whether it's in their lifetime or beyond, that they want to achieve with their philanthropy, and how do they maximize it? Because so often we are caught in this cycle of just asking for immediate gifts, which will generally come out of their income. But there are many other ways that donors may want to give and it might be more beneficial. So as Lori mentioned, some deferred giving vehicles like annuities or trusts. There could be also assets like appreciated securities or property, or they could be named as beneficiaries to life insurance policies and so forth, or retirement plans. So there are a lot of different ways that a donor has probably not thought about including the charity of their choice in multi designations, so to speak. So I think really being open with that donor about what they want to achieve, having the conversation about what are the immediate needs for the organization and how maybe the shorter term cash contribution could be useful, but then over time, what are the other vehicles that could also contribute to that organization's mission?
Barbara, let me ask you too, because there may be some board members of nonprofit organizations listening in. How do we have conversations with our board members who obviously care a lot about the organization, but may have not thought about planned gifts or, in this case, legacy gifts around bequests? How do we begin having those conversations with our fellow board members?
So I would say often a legacy society, creating one, if you don't already have one, is a easy entry point to a conversation about that, right? I mean, it's hard. It's a difficult conversation to have because nobody wants to think about their death. Nobody wants to talk about a sensitive topic like this. But when you reframe it in the context of your life story, and it's interesting. I was reading some work by Russell James, who is sort of the preeminent expert on planned giving, and he was talking about some neuroscience research that was done, and the parts of the brain that lit up in the neuroscience imaging when that donor or that participant was thinking about bequests were the parts that are self-realization and visualization. So in other words, how we define our life story. So it's a little bit of a wonky explanation, but it's how we talk about the life story, our own life stories, and where that organization fits in. So a legacy society is a great starting point, an easy entry point to having this conversation with boards. But I think also doing reflections with your boards as a whole about why they're there, why this organization is important to them and their time now, and how can it be important to them over time, even beyond when they've stepped down from the board, and bringing up other deferred giving vehicles, like Lori talked about, the sort of in the now deferred giving and the estate planning, letting them sort of figure out where they want to fit in into their charitable plans. That organization will be important, and really having those honest one-on-one conversations. Some board members may choose not to, this organization, as important as it might be, may not be part of the whole life story for them, and that's okay too.
Yeah. Well, Lori, I want to get into how we begin to think about managing the remainder of our estate and how we think about distributing some of that maybe to a charitable organization. So if we have X number of dollars in our estate, how might someone think about distributing that? Obviously, we want to leave some to maybe family members, depending on what that relationship is, I guess. We want to leave some to things that matter to us. But how do we think about charities as a recipient, I guess, of that estate? Is there a percentage we should think about? Is there any formula that we can begin to think about? And when is the best time to plan for these kinds of things?
Right. So unfortunately, there's no set formula. It's such a personal choice for the individual. And so much goes into it. It's such a multi-layered decision: family, advisors, relationship with the organization, how many organizations the person is connected with. I've seen some wills that have over 30 nonprofits listed, and I've seen that have one. So it really just depends on the individual, and it's a very personal decision. So there's no set formula. I would say that what's wonderful about a bequest is that the donor, the individual, has control over their assets for their lifetime, which is something that concerns many individuals. Will I have enough money for medical expenses, my grandchildren going to college, whatever their life concerns may be, they have control over their assets during their lifetime when a bequest is made in the will. And they should certainly consider those needs first as they're drafting their will with their advisor about making sure that their family and expenses and whatever they need to take care of first. Most individuals, what I see is that they like to leave a bequest as a residuary beneficiary, which is really a nice way to do a legacy gift because it's after everyone and everything has been taken care of. The residual, the leftover at the bottom, can be split between the charities of their choice. So that is a really nice way to do a gift to a charity as well. I will say that those gifts tend to be very large because most people, when they draft their will, may live another 20 years or so, and their assets grow over time. And so those gifts tend to be quite large. So something to consider as you are mapping out your philanthropy. The best time to do it is really any time. It really depends on their age and stage of life. There are, we see a lot done when someone is doing any type of estate planning, working with their advisors. It could be around tax time. There's really no set way or best way to do it. It's really an individual thing. Stages could be selling a business, retiring, last grandchildren is out of college, so it just depends on their circumstances and when they feel the right time is for them to make that gift, whether they share that information with the nonprofit or not.
Sure. And would it make sense for us to reflect throughout our lives on what we want to do and maybe make changes in that plan?
Absolutely. It is really such a personal choice, and many people change over time. So there are certainly, you want to be in the first will, but as an organization, but you also, of course, want to be in the last will. And a lot of that gets with the engagement you have with your donor. Every nonprofit has their legacy giving donors in their database. They are their engaged donors. It's not about donor acquisition for legacy gifts. It's a marriage. So they just need to look at who is most engaged within their database and have the conversation. And like Barbara said, start planting the seed. Donors don't know about legacy giving most of the time. And so they don't know that you can accept these types of gifts, or that there are multiple gifts that they can give. They don't have to just give one legacy gift. So really, it's a partnership between the nonprofit and the donor, and their advisors and whoever that person brings along in their journey. It could be family members, their children. It really is, it's the ultimate gift a donor will do.
So Jess, is it helpful to the nonprofit to ask for a restriction, or is it helpful, I guess, when a donor puts a restriction on those funds? I know probably most nonprofits would prefer to have unrestricted gifts, but what's your thought about that from a nonprofit's perspective?
Well, certainly if you're considering funding something with like a laser focus, right? Let's say you have a relationship with a nonprofit and you're just really in love with this one program that they have, and you want to make sure that that program gets funded. That's a reasonable thought process for a donor. I think the problem that can come up for the nonprofit is over time, things change, programs get maybe merged into a different organization, or sometimes the restriction can sort of hamstring the nonprofit in ways that you might not understand. I can think of one time that a gift of real estate was left through a will, and the restriction was that the land should never be broken, meaning it should never be plowed. And this was a conservation group, so that made sense to the donor. But if they had spoken more with the charity, they would have understood that sometimes in order to restore native grasslands, you might need to do something like plowing it in order to do restoration work. So that restriction kind of put artificial handcuffs on the nonprofit, that it was sort of like, oh, how do we deal with this now? So really staying in relationship with the nonprofit if you can, especially if you're going to restrict the gift in some sort of very specific way, that's often very helpful for you to have a conversation. And sometimes people just want to stay anonymous, or like not have anyone expect that it's coming. Especially I think where I'm sitting in Minnesota, we tend to be indirect communicators and we don't maybe like to talk about it so much. But I would say as a donor, if you are going to have a laser focus and have some sort of very specific instructions, it's a good thing to talk with the nonprofit ahead of time.
Just picking up on the example that Jess just shared, some organizations may have in their gift acceptance policy that they won't accept certain types of gifts, like artwork, like real estate and other assets, other sort of non-cash property. So it's important that if a donor is thinking about something that is not cash or stock or something else in that way, that they really clear that and ensure that the organization will be able to accept it. Because otherwise, then the organization will find themselves in this situation where they've now got to figure out how to best steward the donor intent of that gift.
That's a great point. And I'm sure that most people won't think about that, but if you haven't, it's going to be a real problem for the organization, and you're not going to be in a position, obviously, to make that change after you're gone. So really important to think about. Well, let me ask this question, maybe to all of you. From the standpoint of a nonprofit, we're sitting here probably thinking about what it's going to take to keep our organization going today and in the future. And we're trying to generate as much in a way of resources to carry out those missions. But probably when you're thinking about making a planned gift, at least a gift in the form of a bequest, you're thinking about how you can create the largest impact maybe for the longest amount of time. How do we reconcile those two ways of thinking? With the donor thinking, this is my last gift, I want it to be impactful, I want it to be meaningful for a long time. and the donor and the organization that's thinking about, how do we get as much as we can today to deal with some of the challenges that we have today and maybe position us for the future. And I'll just start with you, Jess.
Oh, starting with me. I was really hoping you weren't going to start with me.
Okay. All right. Well, let me start with you then, Barbara.
So I would say, and I think this is probably more in Lori's court, but I would say from my perspective, it is about having those conversations with whether you're the donor or the nonprofit, having those conversations to determine what are the short-term and long-term ways that are going to really stretch the impact of that investment in the organization. So often, we see, they call them blended gifts, where, especially for larger contributions, the fundraiser and the donor are really talking together about the short-term kind of cash payments, pledge payments, for example, if it's for a campaign or a larger endowment, where it's going to be cash in the immediate short term, and then what are the deferred giving vehicles that can count over time and have a longer runway. And so it is a balance, and there's no one way I would think that, or I have seen that works. It's completely dependent on the donor and what their situation is. But I'm sure Lori has other more brilliant ideas.
I don't know about more brilliant, but one thing also, so I work with both nonprofits and individuals. And for the nonprofits, first, we always talk about what are your goals, and do you need to raise deferred giving, or maybe what are your short-term goals, your long-term goals, and what kind of assets do you need to cover all of that? And once we have those, because maybe they have some short-term goals or something maybe 5 to 10 years out, that they can start raising types of plan gifts that are more immediate and would help them with those goals. And then there are the ones that are further out through bequests. And then to create those revenue streams that you can actually project all this revenue is going to come in for decades, and make sure it matches what the goals are for the organization. Now, then when you work on the flip side of that, working with your donors, it is exactly what Barbara said. You're having blended or integrated conversations about one ask, because donors don't want for a fundraiser to come to them multiple times a year asking for more in different gifts. So it's one conversation to really cover their giving for the year. And what does that look like? The gala or the golf outing, their annual gift, a major gift, capital campaign, whatever that looks like. And then plus a legacy gift, if it's appropriate. And to think about what the donors' goals are. Sometimes donors want to support fiscal responsibility for the future, and sometimes I want to support mission now. So you'll have to match that with the goals of the nonprofit. There's no easy answer for this, but it really comes down to communication between the nonprofit and the donor and figuring out what's the best fit.
Yeah, and I would say just for the smallest nonprofits, a lot of these really great answers sort of anticipate that there is a fundraising department, staff, development director. And for some of the smallest nonprofits that donors may be involved with, I would say planning your gift so that if you make an unexpected bequest to a very small, let's say I'm thinking of a particular dog breed club that got a large bequest recently that I worked with, and it came out of left field, and it was for general operating, and they couldn't have been happier, right? Because they don't have fundraising staff. They aren't doing those long range planning conversations because they aren't equipped to have them. I mean, in an ideal world, they would be, but the reality is, considering the size of the organization you're giving to, I think can shape some of whether you're filling immediate needs or letting them decide what they need when the time comes.
And in that case, I think, Jess, sorry, Art, but in that case, I think the if it's a really small staff, a small organization with little to no development staff, then the donor can talk to their financial advisors to determine what's the right mix of a blended gift. So using calculators like many plan giving experts like Lori can use, right? Where it's determining especially if they're looking for what they need now in terms of, whether it's a trust or an annuity, and figuring out, do I give that deferred gift now as part of my, my entire commitment to the organization, and because I want to take care of my family member, or and then a certain portion that will revert back to the family or back to the organization and so forth. So there are financial advisors can use those calculators to determine what will best fit the donor's goals and the nonprofit's goals, if the organization doesn't have the resources to be able to hire a plan giving expert who can, serve in that role.
That's great to know.
Yeah. Let me ask, I just want to pass this on to our listeners. If you have a question, please put it in the chat and I'll try to make sure that we get it asked. Please be thinking about your questions and just put them in the chat. So the question I said I would come back to, Lori, was what are some of the actual vehicles that we have for deferred giving?
Oh, there are so many types of plan gifts. I say I could do plan gift for anyone. If someone has an inclination to make a plan gift, I could figure out the best gift for them. But there are gifts that they can do right now through a donor advised fund, the remainder beneficiary of a donor advised fund, any kind of remainder beneficiary of any type of account a donor has, a savings account, retirement assets are a fantastic gift. These are gifts also that can be done without an attorney, just changing that beneficiary form. I used to say, all you need to do is call up the plan administrator. Now just go online and make that change. You could do a legacy gift in 5 minutes. It'll probably take you longer to remember your passcode, right? So it's really quick to do these types of gifts. And of course, and then as you get more complicated gifts, you can get into gift annuities, which are not too complicated, but you most certainly need to have a contract for that, and a nonprofit would need a permit. There's some regulations around it. Of course, a bequest, there are trusts, there's endowment, which is my favorite. So there's a lot of different gift vehicles and non-cash assets. If an organization is willing to accept it, there's lots of different assets that you can give. So you do need to speak with the organization to find out if they'll accept that type of gift. I think Barbara mentioned that before. So the worst thing that could happen, not the worst thing, but a bad thing that could happen to a nonprofit is getting all this non-cash assets like artwork that they don't need and they would have to sell, and what that it costs more to the nonprofit to actually insure it, to handle it, to all these different things. Same thing with real estate. So you want to get on board with the nonprofit to make sure that they'll accept those types of assets. But it could be a great thing to give. I worked with an organization that a donor really wanted to make a large legacy gift to them, but they didn't have discretionary assets to do right now to make a large major gift. So they gifted a piece of jewelry that they had from a great aunt. It had no sentimental value anymore, and it was a $12,000 value, and they were able to do a significant gift to that organization by using an asset they didn't need anymore. So there's lots of different ways. You can really do a lot of very creative work with your advisors on making sure that it's the best planned gift or legacy gift for the donor, and that it matches the needs of the nonprofit.
Terrific. One big question I have is, how do you go about selecting an advisor? What should I be looking for in an advisor? Lori, maybe you can start with that.
Sure. Well, it depends on the advisor. Certainly advisors that we always suggest that individuals have are their tax advisor or their attorney. Depending on the individual, there could be advisors, a business valuation expert if they're selling their business and they want to make a large donation to a nonprofit. There's so many different professionals that could be involved with the planning process. If they're looking for a philanthropic advisor, such as myself, that is someone that should have a background in the nonprofit sector. I'm also an attorney and I'm a chart advisor philanthropist. So there's this different things you have to look at, but you have to really have a connection with the person and understand what the goal is, and find someone that can help you fulfill your dreams, really, because they're different for everyone. So someone that is outside of not working in the nonprofit that you want to support, so someone that's a neutral party, is also helpful as you're developing your philanthropic plan.
Yeah. So Barbara and Jess, do you think that there are organizations that need to demonstrate that they're prepared to receive these kinds of gifts? How does an organization go about demonstrating that?
Oh, let's defer to Barbara on this one. I want to hear what she's got to say.
I was going to defer to you.
I can answer it.
I'll start and then I'll pass the baton to both of you. I think any organization, of course, can and should be set up to receive bequests at least. It's as simple as putting language on your website that suggests the language that a donor could put into their will, and it really doesn't require any other technical expertise on staff or contracted as counsel. But that said, there's always the disclaimer that the donor has to seek their own financial and legal advice to make sure that it's all in line with them. But the other thing I would say is that so often donors who leave bequests unexpectedly are not unknown to the organization. In other words, they are often, almost in every single instance, long-standing, low-level donors who wouldn't ordinarily pop to the radar of the nonprofit. So Jess's example of this unexpected bequest, that donor was probably really
100%.
Right?
Longtime member.
Yeah, loyal, just average, $25 donor, maybe $50 donor, nothing extraordinary in their giving that would say to any staff member, oh, we should probably talk to this person. And so part of, regardless of the organization's capacities, at least once in a while, if they have no staff, at least once in a while, they should be looking at who are our longest standing donors, because right there, that's going to be a clue that they might have this isn't a cause that's important to them. They're probably debunking the average gift life, the longevity for an organization, because donors typically just spend about 7 years with a nonprofit before they change their philanthropic plan. So if they're sticking around for a long time, that's a good signal. But for those organizations that have some staff, they really do want the same thing. They want to be looking at who are our longest standing donors. Do we have our language in place and the ways to make and express their interest in making a bequest in place so that it's easy? We've reduced all the friction. We've not made it difficult. The donor can easily find the information that they need to make this decision. And there's also now really great AI tools that can do analytics on a file to identify who are those donors that might be more inclined to make a planned gift of some sort. So there are tools that a nonprofit can use for sure. But even if they don't have access to those, the good old fashioned looking to run a donor report to say who has been sticking with us for the longest, that's a great way to engage with those donors. And share with them information, a one-sheet information page about leaving the organization and its estate plans.
And I guess for my 2 cents, I would just say, sort of if the idea is what makes a deserving nonprofit, I think the one that you're most passionate about, regardless of whether they have an entire fundraising team on staff, right? There's nothing like a bequest to kick off a planned giving awareness for a nonprofit and to get them thinking about, oh, this is a thing. We need to pay attention to this. We've been so small and so just like drinking out of the end of the fire hose every day that we haven't put a lot of thought into this, and now we need to. There's nothing wrong with that. Somebody has to give the first one. So I would say the most deserving nonprofit is the one you feel is doing the most important work for you.
Mm-hmm. Lori, were you going to also add something to that?
Yeah, so just a couple, I think they covered just about everything, but a couple of things, like to make sure that the nonprofit is ready to accept these types of gifts, because I have seen that there's a windfall that comes in and they don't even know what to do with it, and then they spend it all rather than saving it, rather than maybe put in quasi endowment, or it's really trying to be thoughtful about the funds that are coming in. And absolutely, I get calls all the time for a board says we just got a bequest, we should get more of these, let's talk to Lori. And so how would you set up this program? So that happens a lot. I think also what's important is to be proactive, and a lot of donors don't know about legacy giving, and it's really important to do a lot of marketing. It's such a marketing driven program, and a lot of it is education, creating awareness, and then we always lead our donors through the process. So we make it very easy for them. We reduce friction, like Barbara had said, but we also make sure we follow up. So many gifts fall through the cracks because the donor didn't call you back, and then you're on to the next thing. We have a lot of competing priorities working in the nonprofit sector. We're very busy, but it's really important to follow up with your donors about their inquiries. Legacy giving takes some time. It's not like writing out a check for your annual campaign gift. It takes a lot of thought and planning, working with family and advisors. So this is not a quick gift. It's about building relationships. So even if the nonprofit doesn't have a large staff, it really is important to maybe have one person that focuses on the plan giving program or legacy program to make sure they are the face of it, and that a donor knows who to call with questions about something that's very personal to them. So that, I think, helps a lot when you're building that plan giving program and sharing it with your donor base to be able to bring in those gifts.
So how do we make our donors ready for these kinds of appeals? And, by that, I mean, I'm let's say the guy who gives, $50 every few quarters to the organization. I have a reasonably good estate. How do we make appeals to people for bequests without them feeling somehow uneasy about the appeal? I mean, it seems to be a little bit of a dance that you have to have with your donor. And would a person feel a little odd getting something like that? And should we be saying something now to donors who may be hearing this, that it's okay for you to get this? Don't get mad at the charity just because they ask you to leave some money after you're gone. Barbara?
So, as Lori said, promoting plan giving opportunities takes time. And I think and it's definitely, because it's such a sensitive issue, whether you're talking about bequests when nobody wants to talk about our own deaths, or other deferred giving vehicles, it is going to take sort of a drip, drip, drip approach. And so if the organization does a very targeted communications, so let's say they've run their list and they've seen who their longest standing donors are. Maybe they've done an overlay of age so they can figure out where what the average age of their donors, and they further refine that segment so that it's very targeted to those who are most likely to have a will or most likely to be in that age group to write a will. It could be a matter of just providing some resources. As you think about your estate planning, here are some tips to keep in mind. And it could be a one page that's shared with them. It could be a video that's shared that talks about the organization, and same thing, same segment, but it is more emotive in tugging at the heartstrings of the viewer to connect them back to why they're connected with that organization in the first place, so that as they are thinking about their own life story, they can see where this organization fits in. So it could be things like that, that are sort of that blending of the facts and figures of how to do the estate planning or deferred giving, and also the long-term legacy of why this is important, what's going to happen in the future.
Yeah, Adam, I would add to that.
Yeah, please go ahead.
What Barbara said was completely spot on, and also sharing stories. That is a really great way, because number one, donors are going to see social proof that other people are doing these types of gifts. So therefore they want to join them. They may even know who they are. And sharing stories, legacy stories through your from your donors that have given. And even if you don't have legacy donors yet, you can find inspirational stories from volunteers or anyone related to the organization. And sharing that information will really engage people to want to stay connected. Legacy giving is like a little bit of a switch of the language that we give to donors. It's about them, it's not about us. So it's really about the value the donor feels, not about how wonderful our organization is and all the good work we do. It's about what they care about that we do. So it's really kind of switching the language a little bit, and that will draw donors in.
Yeah.
I'm also just picturing, I'm only 44 now, but like when that first AARP targeted mailing comes, I'm just going to be like, oh, yeah, right. I need to start thinking about these things. So I feel like if you're in that season of life, you know, it is okay to start thinking about your legacy and what you are going to do. And it's never a bad thing to help people think about getting their estate organized. Having two 95-year-old grandparents and my mom dealing with them right now can confirm these are good things to work out regardless. So we're in the sector, we're helping people get organized as well. So
Yeah. Well, I have to tell you, as someone who's heading into the fourth quarter of his life, you do tend to think about this more. You think about your own demise, so to speak, and what that means to the people who you will probably leave behind, and the organizations that matter to you. And you even begin thinking about, how do I make sure that I provide or leave enough in the way of resources to meet some of the obligations that I feel I have. Now, these aren't real obligations, but these are self-imposed obligations. You begin thinking about, maybe how can I make sure that I set aside a bit more money so that I can have this kind of more lasting financial impact on the people who matter to me. So I guess there's a whole round of budgeting and making sure that you're living your life the way you want to, but maybe not overdoing it so that you have somewhat of a remainder to take care of some of the people that matter. Let me ask you this too. We've heard a lot about the giving pledge. These are the super wealthy billionaires who have decided that they want to give away more than half of their wealth during their lifetime. And that's great. They've decided that the number is, we have all this money, we're going to live just fine if we give away half of it. How should we be thinking about that? Those of us who aren't billionaires, how should we be thinking not only about our bequests, what we're going to do later on, but how should we be thinking about that now in relation to what we can do later on? Anybody want to tackle that question?
Lori, do you want to start?
Sure. I mean, again, it's a personal decision. Most people don't have that type of wealth, so they can't really relate exactly to that, as many people are struggling to meet, all their obligations that they have during their life. Those that have the opportunity to make a legacy gift or maybe a larger major gift during their lifetime or in the form of a planned gift, it's a personal choice. It's really it's hard to answer how to quantify it, but it really does come down to having that connection with the organization, understanding the ways that one can give back, and have a feeling of wanting to have more significance in their life, whether it's to their community, to their family, and making that connection. It really is a connection between multiple parties, between the individual, their advisors, and the nonprofit. Everyone needs to come to the table to talk about that individual's legacy. So it's hard to say like what exactly it is and what may be triggering it in someone's life, but it's usually certain stages in their life that a person would feel the urge to make a legacy gift. We tend to look at older individuals because that's a natural state of doing estate planning, but it can be from younger individuals as well. So anyone can add to that. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd add to that all the great points, Lori. And I would say that so often as donors, we are thinking about what can we afford now, instead of thinking about what's the fullest impact that we can stretch to, whether it both in the short term and the long term. So, for example, somebody might come into an inheritance, which means that gives them a little bit more financial flexibility to stretch their gift over a longer period of time, perhaps also in some deferred giving vehicle or in their estate plans, as one example. And there might be some, for when the market was on the up, many people had appreciated securities that they could take advantage of. So that could have been another option. Real estate as well, if they have some real estate or other personal property that they want to donate. So I think that as donors, we often ourselves box ourselves into, I can write a check or I can make that credit card contribution. And I'm sort of limited to what I can afford right now. But I would encourage all donors to be thinking about how can they stretch their philanthropy and their generosity in ways that really maximize the benefit and the impact that their gift can have over the short and long term.
Yeah. This is also something that's been said before, but I want to really emphasize it. We are dealing with organizations today who are seeing a decline in the number of people giving to them. Somehow or another, their overall giving to philanthropic organizations hasn't gone down. It's actually gone up, but the number of people giving has declined. And I guess the question that I have, and what I want to recommend to our donors who are listening, is there may be ways for you to help organizations increase their fundraising. And I know that doesn't sound like a sexy sort of gift to make, but believe me, if organizations could solicit more and solicit more types of people, they could raise more money. And by raising more money, you've done something for them that they might not be able to do, but for your gift. It's really important that they have the resources to actually solicit people. And, we're often told you don't want your money going to an organization that's going to spend it on fundraising. But if it's intentional, because you're trying to position an organization to be able to generate resources long after you're gone, what a better gift. What a better gift than to give the organization a capacity it needs to continue to fish for donors to meet its mission. I don't know if people think about that, but I wanted to put that out there. Giving an organization that freedom to use your money, to go out and raise money, can be one of the most powerful things you can do, even though it certainly runs counter to everything that you've probably been taught and everything that you've heard. I don't know what your reaction is to that thought, but I thought I would mention that because I don't know if many people think that way.
I want to do the little gif of like somebody standing up and clapping like, yes, yes, Art. Yes, that's exactly so powerful.
Yeah.
I agree. And it reminds me of a cartoon or a story that I read that you don't want to fly an airplane that has the lowest costs that are spent on maintenance, right? So, so it's true. Nonprofits need to build capacity in order for them to thrive, and funders really should be supporting that.
Yeah, and I will stay off my soapbox about overhead and the perceptions of overhead and how nonprofits themselves often hold themselves back in really advocating for that. But you've said it brilliantly, Art, that donors need to allow the organization to spend their gifts, their unrestricted gifts, where it makes the most impact and how it's going to help them be more sustainable and thrivable over the longer period of time. So if they keep focusing on only the program, they will never grow. Program is important, but if they don't have the infrastructure in place to continue to grow and raise more money, then they will stay in a very stagnant state.
Yeah. We do have a question from Dale. Dale, would you go ahead and ask your question?
Yes, I appreciate that. So you've raised a question in my mind. If an organization that we support gets a larger gift on our death, might they end up being kind of spendthrift with that? And so are there ways kind of from the grave to be able to manage that so that that doesn't happen, such as through an endowment? Are there other ways that you can make sure your money isn't spent too unwisely?
Mhm.
Sure. Who wants to tackle that one?
I think Lori or Jess.
Lori should do that one.
Let me give you a
Hey,
couple thoughts. So, of course, endowment would help with that if you set up an endowment of those funds, because by law it has to be spent depending on what the donor's intent was with the restricted endowment. But you can do something like a gift agreement with the organization. This is why it's so helpful to talk to an organization when you're thinking about doing a legacy gift. It could still be as a bequest, but you could have an agreement with the organization about how those funds are going to be used, and that would be an agreement. You could also get family involved, so next of kin or anyone that can also be involved in the gift process, that they would also be able to have a little bit oversight of that later on.
great. And I see Rick Reichert also has a question. Rick?
Oh, hey there. Yeah, I couldn't put anything in the chat. It's disabled during recording. I like what you're saying about we are definitely seeing a loss of donors by the numbers, but we're here in Greenwich, Connecticut, we're seeing more and more at the top of the pyramid. And inflation is going to continue to impact our lower dollar donors. But I do like what you're saying. These are some really, really good suggestions here. Not really much of a question, but just a chime in here.
Great. Thank you, Rick.
Yep.
Well, let me just, I don't think we have any other questions. So let me just thank our guests. You guys have been terrific. Lori, Barbara, and Jess, thank you so much for agreeing to be a part of this. As you heard from Rick, these have been very helpful comments and suggestions that you've given. And I just now hope that all of us will go home and draft a will if we don't have one, or or reach out to our financial advisors to figure out how we can leave some money to our favorite charities and do it in a way that's lasting, impactful, and certainly meaningful. And don't forget about leaving a little bit to support how they operate, their administration, because teaching them, giving them the capacity to fish is just as important as giving them the fish. And I want to thank all of you who support the BBB Wise Giving Alliance and give.org. Your support means the world to us. And it wouldn't be a bad idea either if you thought to leave us a little something at the day you enter those pearly gates. I want to thank Julie Rizzo of our team for organizing this, and Madhu Debnath. And for all of you who are listening to this as part of our podcast, the Heart of Giving podcast, thank you for listening. And I hope you will tune into our other episodes that you can find on all major podcast platforms. Thank you for listening.
You've just listened to the Heart of Giving podcast with Art Taylor. Be sure to tune in next time for a brand new episode. To listen to our other interviews, visit heartgiving.podbean.com. That's heartgiving.podbean.com. Subscribe to our show on major podcast platforms. The thoughts and opinions expressed on this podcast are the views and opinions of the guests, not those of the BBB Wise Giving Alliance or program affiliates. This podcast is for information and educational purposes only and is copyrighted with all rights reserved. This podcast is protected by Podbean's terms of service.